An elderly woman stumbled and fell, collapsing in the middle of the crosswalk. For a moment everyone froze, unsure of what to do. Then, out of nowhere, Barron Trump stepped forward. What he did next didn't just stop traffic. It left everyone watching with tears in their eyes. The street was bustling with the usual chaos of a weekday afternoon. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, their shoes tapping against the pavement in a hurried rhythm. Office workers clutched their briefcases, while others balanced bags of groceries, weaving through the crowd with practiced precision. The air was thick with the hum of life, distant car horns, snippets of conversations, and the occasional bark of a dog tied to a lamppost. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow that softened the hard edges of the busy cityscape. Street vendors called out to passers-by, their carts filled with steaming pretzels and roasted nuts, the scent mingling with the faint tang of exhaust fumes from the endless stream of cars and buses crawling along the road. In the middle of this vibrant chaos stood Barron Trump, unassuming in his casual hoodie and jeans. He had stopped at the corner of the intersection, his tall frame blending into the crowd. His gaze was steady, taking in the movement around him as if searching for something. Despite the rush around him, he exuded a quiet calm that seemed out of place amidst the noise. But just as the crosswalk sign flashed green and the crowd surged forward, something caught his attention. An elderly woman, her frail hands gripping a small bag, stumbled on the uneven pavement. Time seemed to slow as she crumpled to the ground, her bag spilling its contents into the street. The bustling crowd paused, a momentary hush falling over the scene. And in that split second, Barron's calm demeanor shifted. He took a step forward, his actions about to change everything. The woman hit the ground hard, her cane clattering to the side and her small bag spilling its contents, a few apples, a wallet, and a folded scarf, onto the asphalt. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled under the effort, and she sank back down, clearly overwhelmed. Around her, people slowed their steps, glancing at her, but no one stopped. A few muttered under their breath, unsure whether to intervene or keep walking. Barron noticed the hesitation immediately. Standing just a few feet away, he saw the confusion on the faces of those passing by, some even stepping around her as if avoiding an inconvenience. His heart clenched at the sight. She was vulnerable, in the middle of the street, and with every passing second, cars waiting at the intersection grew impatient, their horns blaring louder. The elderly woman let out a soft groan, her hand reaching for her bag. Her glasses had slid down her nose, and she seemed disoriented, glancing around for help that wasn't coming. A group of teenagers nearby looked over, but instead of offering assistance, they giggled nervously and continued walking. Barron's instincts kicked in. Without hesitation, he stepped into the crosswalk, weaving through the stalled crowd. As he approached her, he noticed the tear in her coat sleeve, the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead, and the way her lips quivered, not just from the fall, but from the embarrassment of being so exposed. Kneeling beside her, he spoke gently, his voice cutting through the noise. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His calm tone seemed to break through her panic. She looked up, her eyes watery but wide with surprise. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to. I just lost my balance." Barron shook his head firmly. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said. "Let's get you out of the street." He placed her scattered belongings back into her bag, his movements careful and deliberate. Around them, the crowd had begun to take notice. People stopped in their tracks, watching the scene unfold. A man near the curb pulled out his phone, recording the moment, while others whispered to one another. As Barron gently helped the woman to her feet, she winced, clutching her knee. "I think I twisted something," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I can't walk very far." "It's okay," Barron reassured her, adjusting his grip to support her weight. "We'll take it one step at a time." The streetlights changed again, but the cars at the intersection didn't move. Drivers leaned out of their windows, some annoyed but others clearly watching with interest. The noise of the city seemed to fade as the moment grew more intimate. For Barron, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. He had seen someone in need, and he was determined to help. even as the world around them kept moving. Barron wrapped his arm around the elderly woman's shoulders, steadying her as she struggled to put weight on her injured leg. "It's okay, I've got you," he said softly, his voice steady and calm. The bustling street seemed to fade into the background, but he could still feel the weight of eyes on them. People stopped to watch, some murmuring quietly among themselves, while others simply stared, unsure of what to do. The woman's breathing was shallow, and her hands trembled as she clutched his arm for support. I don't want to be a bother," she muttered, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "You're not," Barron replied firmly. "We all need a little help sometimes." He gave her a reassuring smile, one that seemed to ease the tension in her face, if only slightly. "Let's get you to the sidewalk, okay?" Slowly he began to guide her out of the crosswalk. The crowd parted as they moved, people stepping aside but still lingering to watch. Barron noticed a man in a business suit, standing with his head as if irritated by the delay. Another woman pulled out her phone to record, her face a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Isn't that—" someone whispered from the side, their voice trailing off as they pointed toward Barron. The murmurs grew louder as more people recognized him, but he ignored them, his focus entirely on the woman leaning against him. I was trying to get to the bus stop," she said, glancing toward a bench a few feet away. "I've been feeling dizzy all morning, I should have known better." Barron nodded, listening intently as they made their way toward the bench. "We'll sit you down, and then we'll figure out what to do," he said. "You don't have to worry about anything right now." As they reached the bench, Barron helped her lower herself onto it slowly. She winced as she adjusted her position, her hands gripping the edge for support. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done." Before she could finish, a middle-aged man in the crowd stepped forward hesitantly. "Does she need water?" he asked, holding up a bottle. Barron turned to him, nodding appreciatively. "That would be great, thank you." The man handed over the bottle, his expression softening. "You're doing a good thing, kid," he said quietly, before stepping back into the crowd. Barron opened the bottle and passed it to the woman, who took small, careful sips. Her hands still shook, but the color in her face began to return. "You've been so kind," she said, looking up at him with watery eyes. "You didn't have to do all this." "It's the least I can do," Barron replied, crouching down to meet her gaze. "Are you feeling a little better now?" "A little," she admitted, her voice steadier. "But I don't think I can make it to the bus on my own." Barron thought for a moment before standing and scanning the crowd. "Does anyone here have a car nearby?" he called out, his voice clear and confident. "She needs a ride." For a moment there was silence. The crowd seemed unsure how to respond, shifting awkwardly. But then a young woman stepped forward, holding up a set of keys. "I can give her a ride," she offered, her voice firm. "I'm parked just down the street." "Thank you," Barron said with genuine gratitude. He turned back to the elderly woman. "Does that sound okay to you?" She nodded, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. "That's more than okay," she said softly. As the young woman went to get her car, Barron stayed by the elderly woman's side, keeping her steady and talking to her in soothing tones. Around them the crowd began to shift. People who had been hesitant at first now looked inspired, their faces reflecting admiration. One man who had been silently watching spoke up. "I wouldn't have expected someone like him to step in like this," he said to no one in particular. Another woman added, "It's refreshing to see someone actually care." Barron overheard the comments but didn't react. He wasn't doing this for attention or praise. For him it was simple. Someone needed help, and he was there. By the time the young woman pulled up with her car, the mood on the street had changed completely. The impatience and chaos of the afternoon had been replaced with something quieter, almost reverent. People moved aside to let them through, some even clapping softly as Barron helped the elderly woman into the car. As the car drove away, Barron stood for a moment, watching until it disappeared down the street. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy lingered, a sense of connection and kindness that wasn't there before. For Barron, it was just another moment to do the right thing. But for those who witnessed it, it was a reminder of the power of compassion. As the car began to drive away, Barron turned to leave, assuming his part in the moment was over. But before he could take another step, the car stopped. The young woman who had offered the ride stepped out and jogged back toward him. Her face was filled with urgency, and her voice was slightly shaky. "She's asking for you," she said, catching her breath. "She wants to talk to you." Barron hesitated, surprised, but nodded and followed her back to the car. The elderly woman was leaning against the seat, her face still pale, but her expression determined. Her eyes, full of emotion, locked onto Barron as he crouched down to meet her at eye level. "I couldn't leave without saying something," she began, her voice soft but steady. "You remind me so much of my grandson." Barron blinked, taken aback by her words. "Your grandson?" he asked gently. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her bag. From it, she pulled out a small, worn photo. It was a picture of a young man, smiling brightly, his arm around her shoulders. "He was just like you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Kind, thoughtful, always stepping in when someone needed help." She paused, her breath hitching as she looked at the photo. "But he's gone now. Lost him a few years ago in an accident. It broke me." Her hands tightened around the picture, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But seeing you today, it felt like he was here again, even for just a moment." Barron didn't know what to say. He felt a lump in his throat as he watched her clutch the photo as though it was the only piece of her grandson she had left. I'm so sorry for your loss," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of her pain. The woman shook her head, her lips quivering. "You don't have to be sorry. You reminded me that the kindness he carried hasn't disappeared. It's still in the world, in people like you." The young woman who had offered the ride stood quietly nearby, her eyes glistening as she listened. A few bystanders, who hadn't yet dispersed, also paused, their faces reflecting the emotion of the moment. Barron reached out, his hand covering hers gently. "I'm honored you see him in me," he said sincerely. "But your grandson's kindness, that's part of you too. You passed that on to him, and you're still sharing it." The elderly woman let out a shaky breath, her tears spilling over now. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't just help me today. You reminded me of something I thought I'd lost forever." Barron gave her a small, steady smile. "It's always here," he said softly. "Sometimes we just need a little reminder." The car door closed gently, and as the young woman drove off with the elderly woman in the passenger seat, the moment hung in the air like a quiet, unspoken truth. Around him, the remaining crowd looked at Barron with a mix of awe and admiration. But he didn't linger. He turned and walked away, blending back into the rhythm of the busy street. For those who had witnessed it, the moment wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a powerful reminder of the connection we all share, of the ways we carry the legacies of those we love, and of the beauty in helping one another. Even if only for a moment. As the car disappeared down the street, the crowd that had gathered around began to disperse, but something had shifted. The hurried, chaotic energy of the busy street was replaced with a quiet hum, almost as if people were walking away lighter than before. A man who had been leaning against a lamppost watching the entire scene approached Barron. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "That was something. Most people wouldn't have stopped, let alone done what you just did." His voice was sincere, not just an observation but a genuine acknowledgement. Barron looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes, it's the little things," he said simply. "It doesn't take much to make someone's day a little easier." The man nodded, his face softening. "You're right. I think we all forget that sometimes." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Barron to his thoughts. Nearby, a mother with her young son crouched down, whispering something to the boy. The child, no older than 7, ran over to Barron, holding out a crumpled dollar bill. "This is for the lady," he said, his small voice earnest. Barron knelt down to meet the boy's gaze. "That's very kind of you," he said with a gentle smile. "But I think the best thing you can do is keep being kind to people, just like you're doing now." The boy nodded, his face lighting up as he ran back to his mother, who gave Barron a grateful smile. As Barron stood, The young woman who had offered the ride earlier returned, walking briskly toward him. "I just dropped her off at home," she said, slightly out of breath. "She couldn't stop talking about you. Said you reminded her of the best parts of her life." Barron's chest tightened at the words. He looked away for a moment, taking in the gravity of what had just happened. "She reminded me of something too," he said quietly. "That kindness doesn't end. It just finds new ways to grow." The young woman smiled, her expression warm. "Well, whatever it is you're doing, keep doing it. The world could use more of that." As she walked away, Barron stood still, looking around at the now buzzy street. The moment had passed, but its impact lingered. Strangers had connected, if only briefly, and a single act of kindness had turned a bustling, indifferent city corner into something brighter. For Barron, it wasn't about the attention or the recognition. It was about the quiet understanding that sometimes the smallest actions carried the deepest meaning. And for those who witnessed it, they carried that lesson with them, ready to pass it along in their own lives. This story is a testament to the power of small acts of kindness. In a world that often rushes past moments of vulnerability, Barron Trump's decision to stop and help reminds us that compassion doesn't require grand gestures. It's about being present when it matters most. The elderly woman's story, her connection to her grandson, and the way the bystanders reacted all point to a deeper truth. We're all linked by the simple desire to be seen, understood, and cared for. Sometimes a single act of kindness can ripple outward, touching not just the person in need, but everyone who witnesses it. Life moves quickly, and it's easy to overlook those who stumble along the way. But as this moment shows, slowing down and offering help isn't just about making someone else's day better. It's about reaffirming our shared humanity. Each time we choose kindness over indifference, we create a world that feels a little less lonely and a little more hopeful. Let this story remind us all, no act of kindness is too small, and its impact may reach further than we can ever imagine. We carry the power to make a difference, one thoughtful action at a time. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who could use a little reminder about the power of kindness. Small actions can create big changes, just like they did here. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the good in the world. Together, let's spread a message of hope and compassion, one story at a time.